Hey, everybody. Welcome back to My Metabolic Life. I am very excited to share with everybody here Dave Mack. And Dave has an incredibly successful YouTube channel. On July 12th, I made my first appearance on Dave's channel and have been on 3 different times. 2 of my clients have been on Dave's channel talking about their successes with metabolic therapy, also known as keto and or carnivore. And also my co-host on my other podcast, the Metabochondriacs, Dr. Ryan Cooley, has been on Dave's channel. And Dave, I was just checking today, and he's up to 91,000 views and number 8 in most views on the channel. So I'm thrilled about all of that. So Dave has an incredible journey. I've heard him interviewed on other podcasts. I want to help broadcast this because just as Dave's on a mission to get as many success stories as he can, I'm trying to set a benchmark to hit 500 stories in the next 2 years. And I wanted you to be one of them, Dave. So Dave, let's hear about your journey. What's kind of brought you from where you were to how you came across what I like to call metabolic therapy. And I'm going to just kind of shut up and let you do your thing. Please introduce yourself and your story to the audience.
Thank you. Well, first, thanks for having me on, Brett. I really appreciate it. My journey started a long time ago. My journey really started more than 20 years ago, and that was when I first discovered low carb. Um, First discovered Atkins in 2000, and it was life changing. As a 20-something-year-old, I think back then, it was just amazing. I'd finally discovered a way of eating that worked and made my body respond really well. But at the time, I ended up getting talked out of it by a host of people, and against the better judgment of my body. My body was saying, "This works for me. I feel good. Keep eating this way." I listened to everyone else around me and went back to eating normally. And so I kind of, for 20 odd years, I bounced between low carb, keto, and doing a regular diet and not feeling good. But anyway, my transition into carnivore was by accident. Um, I had gone keto to reverse my prediabetes and also to control a drinking problem that I had. And both were kind of very serious issues at the time. I knew I had a drinking problem, but hearing a doctor tell me I had a drinking problem was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. And I decided, okay, well, I'm going to address this with keto. And the reason I decided to go keto at that point was, I think, something that's very important for anyone that hasn't done keto to know. It's something that gives you a lot of self-control. And if you've never experienced it before, you may not realize how much self-control you can actually have. Um, when we do a regular diet, we're just eating the carbs and you know the the regular kind of junk that we put into our bodies all the time. You don't have a lot of control over what you're doing. You're working a lot on autopilot. You're influenced a lot by the marketing messages you see on TV, by the window displays of the food that you see walking past the cafe or the dessert shop or whatever it happens to be. Um, and so you're acting on impulse the whole time. And what I realized way back when I first did Atkins, and I've kind of known inside ever since then, was when I'm not eating the carbohydrate, I have a lot of self control. And so when the doctor said, okay, well, we need to do something about the alcohol, we need to do something about the pre-diabetes, and he wanted to put me on a drug to stop the alcohol, I was like, nah, hang on, I don't like this idea. I'm going to do keto. So I went on to keto, and the self-control came back, and that things went really well as far as, getting the sugar out, getting the alcohol, that kind of thing. But there was a problem. So keto for me meant that I was now incorporating a small amount of veggies into my diet, right? And prior to going keto this time, my diet had been pretty much 100% ultra processed, strictly ultra processed diet. Um, I was eating some eggs, like I had eggs for breakfast pretty much every morning, but other than that, it was strictly ultra processed. And now that I was doing keto, I had that small amount of veggies in my diet. And what I noticed was that I was having some gastrointestinal issues now. And basically after eating breakfast, I was in the bathroom, and it wasn't pleasant. It's not pleasant having diarrhea every morning, And so I was like, what am I going to do? Found some information online that told me that the vegetables I was eating were actually irritants. And I thought, oh, well, this is not good. I'll cut out the veggies for a while. People are saying on YouTube, people seem to be saying that veggies aren't necessary. Um, I don't like them, so I'm going to cut them out and see what happens. So cut them out, and I've been carnivore ever since. And it's been almost 2.5 years now.
That's wild. Um, so, so were you thinking you were just going to cut them out for a short period of time, and then what made you keep them out for this whole period of time?
Well, yeah, I mean, at first, like, I was skeptical at first. Yeah, veggies. Everyone says they're good. I was only eating them because I thought, I need the vitamin C. We're told that's where the vitamin C comes from, and so that's why I was eating them. And I thought, okay, well, I'll cut them out and see what happens. But at the back of my mind, I'm like, oh no, it won't be this. It'll be because I'm eating so much fat. That's why I'm in the bathroom all the time, or it's because I'm not eating fiber or not eating enough fiber or something. And it just, the problems went away, and I was like, okay, well, that's good. And that just made me go down the rabbit hole even more of the few videos I'd watched about, no veggies, carnivore, that kind of thing. And just, I realized, okay, well, there's a whole population of people now that are not eating vegetables, and they're doing okay. They don't look half dead. They actually look pretty good in comparison to people that are eating predominantly vegetables. So I might just stay with this way, and I feel better. So yeah.
So when you talked about the whole kind of control from the whole alcohol standpoint, you found that this has given you just that much more control to say, I don't need it anymore?
Yeah. So I'm at the point now where I feel like I don't need it anymore. Like I have no emotional attachment with alcohol at all. Like I could be sitting here with a beer next to my computer and it would do nothing for me. I wouldn't feel anything. I wouldn't feel the need to drink it. Um, but at the time when I first started, the self-control is really like, it's when you get carbohydrate out of your diet, it just gives you there's this mind change where you can kind of, it's almost like you step back from, being in the middle of the day-to-day kind of like, okay, I've got to do this and I've got to do this and I've got to do this, and then I'll just pick up something to eat and that kind of thing. That kind of just rushing around and going from crisis to crisis or putting out spot fire to spot fire. It getting the carbs out has this thing where you can kind of step back from that and you can kind of have more of a objective look at things. And the best example of this is when I was at work before, I would always be like, if I was working on a project, um, there's always someone on the team that wants to do the project slightly differently, right? And you inevitably there's conflict there when they say, no, we should go in this direction. And it's like you're feeling like, no, I know the project needs to go in this direction, right? And you're having kind of this battle with them, about how best to run the project. And it gets so emotional after a while, and you're so tied to your idea, and you're always trying to promote the way you want to have it done, right? And then once you go on carnivore, or once you get most of the carbs out of your diet and you're able to step back and look at things more objectively, you can kind of go, why do I care about this so much? At the end of the day, even if I get my own way and this project is done successfully the way I want it to be done, what does it matter? What am I going to achieve? Who cares? I'm not even going to engage in this. I'm going to step back and just go, yeah, whatever you want. Let's do whatever you want. And you kind of, you make this break, and it's just, you're able to step back and go, actually, I don't really care anymore. And that extends to food. That extends to basically everything you have an addiction to. It doesn't necessarily break that addiction immediately, but everything you've got this kind of real strong emotional connection with, suddenly that emotional connection gets weaker, and you're able to step back and go, huh? Why do I care about this so much? And I think that's it.
Well, now you've heard hundreds and hundreds, and I know you have over 1,200 videos on your channel, and the vast majority are people telling their success stories with typically the carnivore or ketovore type of an approach. As I was telling you before we started talking, I was just in Washington, D.C., and with some of the leading psychiatric mental health people in the world. Right here, Brain Energy from Chris Palmer, Georgia Eady, Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind. And they have been working with people that have reversed bipolar, depression, anxiety, schizophrenia with all of this. Also, there is a dietitian, her last name is Hearn. The name will come back to me in a second.
Amber Hearn.
And another one, and who has a book called The Dietitian's Dilemma. And she was battling anorexia and battled it for 20 years, even became a dietitian. And it wasn't until and this is where I'm kind of going with why I brought this all up, that she got into low carb, keto, and went carnivore herself. And she's a very high level endurance runner. And this has been a major part of her life. But she goes, once I got to carnivore, and you read her book, which I read on the way back and forth from Washington, D.C., it seems that once you have the base level of nutrition, which you and I both believe, if you're eating the meat, fish, and the eggs, you've got as much nutrient density as you can have going on there. And that she goes, once I got to there was an immediate calm in the brain. All of the ideation, the preoccupation with the food, the preoccupation with I need to be thin, just all of that mental health ideation seems to disappear. And I've just heard so many different people interviewed on like Metabolic Mind and the Bazooki family. And I believe it's Matt Bazooki, the son of the Bazookis, who are starting that whole Metabolic Mind and movement over how being keto reversed bipolar for their son. So to me, there's just, and also I've become a big history buff when it comes to medicine and nutrition and everything like this. And almost every single thing that we have, what we would tie to either mental health things or even just outbreaks of major situations, tended to be more correlated to a lack of nutrition, a malnutrition in the population. And it was those that didn't have close enough to optimal nutrition were the ones
Mm.
that were suffering from things. And there's a book right over here, Turtles Are Down There, Turtles All the Way Down, which goes through all of that. So do you find this as like a recurring conversation with, because I've heard a number of people talk about the depression and everything just lifting from your channel and the people you've interviewed?
Yeah, it's just life-changing for people. Mental health issues. I mean, of course, you've got things like you get the sugar out, the type 2 diabetes is, I mean, no one's coming on and saying, well, I tried it and, I had type 2 diabetes, so I gave it a try. Still got type 2 diabetes, right? It's either gone or it's getting to the point where it's, going to be gone. And yeah, but mental health and, you talk about nutrition, and it seems from the people I talk to, and in my experience as well, it's like the constant eating, the constant snacking, the reaching for the alcohol, the reaching for the sweet drinks. It really seems to be, it's just an automatic reaction, and it's almost like you're on autopilot, but perhaps your mind's directing you and saying like, okay, we don't have any nutrition here, go and get something else. And it's like, well, you're automatic, the way we're trained or indoctrinated or whatever you want to say or marketed to. We If we're hungry, we go and get the McDonald's, we go and get the Burger King, we go and get the sweet treat, and we go, oh, this is great, I really needed this. But your body and your brain's actually going, yeah, well, I can't get much out of this, but yeah, thank you. Maybe go and search for something else once you finish that. And so it feels like the cycle is just continuing. And what we don't know is we're poisoning ourselves. We're poisoning our mind. And and your mind's constantly on the lookout for, yeah, well, where's the nutrition here again? And no, stop doing that one. Stop putting that one in. Go and get some actual food. And we very rarely go out and get that actual food. And even if we do, we cover it in all this poison. We're putting the sauces and all this kind of thing. So yeah, excuse me. People seem to have mental improvements across the board, but I'm not sure I'm addressing your question
No, you
fully.
totally were. I was more a reflection of what you've been hearing from all of the hundreds of people who have brought up mental health calmness and remission and
Mm-hmm.
things like this. And just even me playing off of this last weekend, I got up and I left here at 6:30 in the morning Central Time, flew to Washington, D.C., attended the Integrative Medicine and Mental Health Conference at the Gaylord Resort there. Had a hiccup with losing my phone, went on a scavenger hunt for 3.5 hours, wound up, thank God, getting it back. But didn't, and then I didn't get to my actual hotel where I was staying till 8:30 at night. And I'm just like,
Mm.
I never even thought, I had water when I first woke up. I had a water at the hotel conference, but it never even came up to me during the whole day that I really need to eat. And that's one of the beautiful things of just becoming, again, like we're all born being fat adapted in that physiologic state of nutritional ketosis. We go back to that. And because your body's just always on this perfect, even keel, that you always have enough body fat to keep yourself fed. It's not that we're not eating, it's we're just not eating through the mouth. We are metabolizing all day long with that perfect glucose level that you're never spiking things. You're never in this fight or flight response, which is really kind of what's happening because the body's got to react. And the sympathetic nervous system jumps into what's going on. And, and I think this is where a lot of anxiousness and people that are experiencing anxiety, because their body's just always having to fight off, oh my God, I just got all this Coca-Cola or Mountain Dew in me. I've got to get rid of it. And we now know also in the brain how when glucose spikes up there, the brain has a defense mechanism. It actually turns the excess glucose into fructose, but it can't be metabolized there. Fructose can only be metabolized a little in the GI tract and predominantly in the liver. And that's where we're learning it's turning into those amyloid plaques, and why we consider Alzheimer's, type 3 diabetes, because it can't clear out those plaques effectively. And you're always doing this to yourself time and time again. So the body's just always in a fighting for survival mode. We just call it modern day living and eating like we've been, as you said, conditioned through commercials and what's in the stores. And it appears, that 90% of what we sell, if not more, in the stores is actually just low grade, slow acting toxic poison to us. And once we get back to what we've always eaten, things just come right back. So go ahead, play off of that. If
I was just going to say, just to piggyback on that. Yeah, I mean, and it is slow acting poison. It's you wouldn't treat your car like this. You wouldn't go, yeah, well, I'm putting the premium gas in the car, but I'm also adding a little bit of tonic that I think is nice and sweet into the gas tank afterwards each time, like just in case the car wants it. The car doesn't run on this, I don't know, adding sugar. The car doesn't run on sugar, right? You take it to the mechanic and go, well, the car hasn't been running all that well recently. Every time I stop at a traffic light, it like seizes, and then the radio starts playing or something. Like, what's going on with my car? And the mechanic's going to say, well, why are you putting sugar into it? Well, because I want to. Well, yeah, but that doesn't mean you should do it. And, you're poisoning your car. You wouldn't do that to a car. You wouldn't do that to mostly you wouldn't do that to animals. We do it to our pets, but,
we think we're loving them the way we share love with our family members by making them cakes and pies and treats.
And surprisingly, the only animals that get diabetes are domesticated pets. You don't see a tiger with diabetes.
Or even obesity. There isn't an animal in the wild that's obese. There's some like elephants and rhinoceroses who kind of look like they are, but that's native for them. So,
but all the elephants look the same, right? Like they all have that kind of obese look. It's not like you have one anorexic elephant and
Absolutely. So tell me a little bit about, so you got into this, you've had the success for yourself. What led you to starting your channel?
I was just angry once I realized how much I'd improved. So a lot of people start their channels these days as a way to be accountable to themselves. Like I'll put a video up of what I'm like on day one, and then if I'm feeling a little bit kind of like I want to cheat on day 30, I can just look back at that day one video and go, wow, look how much I've improved. I don't want to cheat. But for me, I'd been doing this for 4 months before I started my channel. And what made me start it was realizing how much I'd improved and going, well, I need to say something about this. I need to talk about this. And I had first thought, I might get 10 people watching my channel, and most of those will be people that I know. But, I'll just put my voice out there. And yeah, a lot of people responded really well to hearing my story. So I just kept making videos and eventually started interviewing people.
It's incredible. And if I didn't say it at the beginning, I've been listening to your channel for over a year, maybe 15, 16 months. And then I also now have become good friends with Jeff Sander, who's been a couple of times on your channel and was the one that introduced the two of us together, because we have a mutual friend that his buddy from high school is a tennis playing buddy of mine. And so I was very aware of watching, and it was just so, to me, powerful to watch all of these people come on. And like myself, I mean, it's no secret. People can go back and look at my first episode with you. And when I start talking about Dr. Sarah Hallberg right here, that was the first time since she had passed away in 2022 where I had started talking about her. And I didn't even give it a moment's thought beforehand, thinking that I could get so emotional. But I realized that she was a major part of my epiphany back in 2018 and led me down to the journey, which, as you know, my story, I was found to have heart disease, atherosclerotic plaque. I've been able to get on top of that and reverse the progression of that disease and a number of other things as well. And so really, as I was telling you my story, I got very emotional and kind of broke down because I didn't anticipate I was going to talking about her for the very first time since she passed. I very much like adopted her like my younger sister or niece, and I thanked her on LinkedIn for changing my life. And I'd watched 40, 50 hours of everything she presented in the science world about all of this, which is what helped convince me. So I know you've had a lot of people get quite emotional also telling their stories. How do you keep it so calm as you're not that everybody's crying or blubbering, but I mean, how does this impact you as you see this so many times? Because you're doing multiple videos a day now, from what I can see.
Yeah, I mean, I struggle to keep it together. Like, I'm typically a very emotional person, and when hearing people's stories is often, it bring you to tears. And so yeah, I'm often during my interviews, you'll see me like blubbering on camera, but it's just amazing. The most upsetting thing actually is people have put up with things for 40, 50, 60 years, and they've put up with those things just because they believed they were doing the right thing with what they were eating. And they believed all the typical mainstream advice, and as soon as they stopped doing that, things improved. Like, conditions people have had for 20, 30, 40 years, just like overnight, it's gone. And that's quite upsetting because, it's great that people have this new beginning and can move forward. And especially because people feel like almost like they've reverse aged, and someone who's 60 years old is feeling like they've got as much energy as they had when they were in high school. Yeah, but it's also it's so bad to feel like there's so many wasted years, and it's great that their whole life is opened up in front of them, but it's also sad that there are those wasted years. And then they go to their doctor and they say, look at this, everything's improved. I don't have the arthritis anymore, I don't have this anymore, I don't have sugar cravings, I don't, I've got more energy than I've ever had before. And the doctor does some blood tests, and they come back the next time, and the doctor's like, well, look at this. And you look at the blood tests, and every metabolic marker is perfect now. And the doctor's like sitting there going, you need to do something about your LDL. Right. No acknowledgement of anything else, and that's kind of very sad as well to see.
It totally is. And just for those not really familiar with the situation who are newer to the channel and these kinds of conversations, it's really only less than a third of people when going down this route that wind up having an elevated LDL. And they also usually tend to fall into what is now identified as a phenotype called the lean mass hyper responders. So usually until pretty much all of the excessive body fat is gone, that doesn't tend to occur unless you're just one of these people, like actually who is me, who I run high on LDL ever since I was young. My first blood test in my 20s as an adult, where I learned about what's going on with me, I've been high on LDL forever. Never was a problem. At 45, I had a zero CT heart scan calcium score, and it wasn't until that next decade of a lot of not handling what we would call stresses of life, family, work, and everything like this properly. And I guess you would say I used food quite a bit as a crutch and somewhat as a drug to numb myself up and do whatever I needed to do to get through with what was going on in the world. But where you, yeah, I mean, that's so much where I am right now too, where you were talking about getting mad and frustrated and what we've all as a society put up with for so long, because I've had a number of things. I've had alcoholism play a role in my family for generations. I've had my mother was bipolar for 70 of her 80-year life, or I should say 60 of her 80-year life. And I'm now sitting here going, oh my God, had I known all of these different things, how different the whole family situation would have been, how I would have realized this isn't how I should deal with stress and move forward. And so part of it's like, well, I can't go back and do things about what happened in the past. But now, where I never would have thought myself, I mean, I just spent money to go to Washington, D.C. for a couple of days. And for all practical purposes, I was an activist. Had you told me 8 years ago I'd be an activist about anything in the world, I would say, you're nuts. But I'm now so fed up and ready to just say, we have to make change. And I just had this conversation earlier today. I'll just throw one more anecdote out there. I'd always kind of said that, oh my God, our previous generations have screwed everything up. Our parents, our grandparents' generations. Well, this hit me when I was 55 and I'm 61 now. I'm now more part of the senior citizen population than I am my kids or grandkids' generation. And we have to make a stop now, because we can't let what's gone on in the last 20 years of this last generation, where 70% of them are coming out of high school. They're not even eligible for the military. They couldn't do the basic physical. And a third of them are already pre-diabetic. And this is something that we never saw until people were in their 60s or 70s when I was a kid. And so it's time to just kind of cut this all off. And I think you and I are both have our militant now activists. I know you said you're going to be going back to Australia, which is where you're natively from, but I believe it's the last 17 or 19 years you've been living in Japan. Would you like to give a quick shout out for what you're going to be doing in
Sure.
Australia?
Sure. So on November 23, there's an event carnivore event in Adelaide, Australia, that is called Carnivore Collective Live. And there's a whole group of carnivores getting together, and we'll be speaking. There'll be me, Bart Kay, Dr. Anthony Chafee, Anthony Fayez, Melissa B., Kerry Mann, Bella from Steak and Butter Gal.
And Kerry's from right down the road from where I am here. He only is about an hour and a half from me. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, cool. Yeah, and so I mean, when I first talked to Kerry, March of 23, the last place I would have expected I'd be meeting up with Kerry would be Adelaide, Australia. Yeah. So yeah, it's going to be a day of interesting talks and carnivore discussions and steak and stuff like that. So the tickets are almost sold out, but there are some available still. So please, if you're interested, go to it's instagram.com/carnivore collective live.
So have you been able to make between what you're doing with these 1,200 plus videos, and I know you've got a big push to get that many more stories. Is it 1,000 stories you want on by the end of the year? How close one are you getting to that? Let me start there and then I'll follow up.
Yeah, so I'm at almost 800 now. So it might be a stretch to get to 1,000 by the end of the year, but that's the goal.
Well, you're inspiring me because I've set a goal to get to 500 in the next 2 years. And starting actually from, we'll call it August, because that's kind of when I really launched my channels and I started interviewing folks. And I'm only up to about 15, 16. You're right in that neighborhood at the moment, plus what I'm doing with Dr. Cooley. So far, his and mine have been mainly just kind of talking science and medical stuff back and forth, but we're about to start bringing some guests on in the near future there. But is this something that you're able to actually support yourself full time with now, or are you still doing your previous profession alongside of all of this?
Yeah, so I am still working. I mean, I'm on a break at the moment because of between contracts, but yeah, sadly, it's not something that I can do full time at the moment. But I have the time right now to, because of the break, to be able to devote the time to it. So I'm doing that now while I can.
Well, I'm trying to, I'm still doing a couple of side hustles as I'm doing the coaching and doing this and looking to build all of that, but hoping to be at least full time between the coaching and everything else that goes along with all of this. But I would find it really difficult to go back to doing something else again because my brain is just so forward about how can I help my coaching clients? How can I help this movement? How can I make sure my grandkids aren't going to have to live through what the last 30, 40 years of the kids growing up in this toxic environment that we've allowed as now the becoming more the senior people in the population. And we need to say it's all done. It stops here. We're not going to harm my kids and grandkids any more than they've already been touched. The grandkids too young to truly be touched. There's still things that I'm sure could be cleaned up. But yeah, I mean, that's where I am with all of this. Not a huge shocker for anybody who had known me the last 6 to 8 years because they've understood how obsessed I've become with all of this. Did you ever think 3 years ago that you could that you would have had 1,200 videos out on the channel?
Never. Yeah, no. So just on the point you just made there, though, about people have just gotten unhealthier and unhealthier. The younger generations are just unhealthier than ever. I think it's so important that people like myself, yourself, everyone else that's in the carnivore community is out there constantly beating the drum about this, because kids are getting sicker and sicker and sicker. As you said, so many kids couldn't pass a military test, the physical. It's just they're getting fatter, they're getting sicker, the fatty liver disease, diabetes, these were diseases of old alcoholic men in the past. These were not diseases of 15-year-olds ever. And I think it's so important that we continue beating the drum, because there are so many regular or mainstream doctors and dietitians out there that are still talking about how, no, we're going in the right direction, everything's okay. You've just got to keep eating more of the good carbohydrate, and keep going the way you're going, and all this kind of thing. And then they look at people like us and they're saying, that's not healthy, that's not good for you, this is a fad, look at your LDL, look at all these problems, you shouldn't be talking about this. And it's like, yes, we should look at the trend. If you don't understand where this is going, you've got your eyes closed. And it's clear for everyone to see what's happened. And that's why we need to be out there beating the drum about this.
Absolutely. And I just think back to, 2018, 2019, as I started doing this, and the people who I was close to, I talked to about it. And, one of them's like, oh, you're being so extreme. I could never go and be that extreme. And for 6 years, I've been trying to explain to this person that, well, really, all that I'm doing is eating how your great grandparents and my grandparents and the 1,000 generations before them ate. They ate some chicken, they ate some beef, they ate some eggs, they ate some fish. They had seasonal veggies available to them. They weren't flying avocados and kiwi all over the world 24/7, 365. I eat, and if you look at my plates, yeah, there's bacon there. And we've all, everything we've demonized has come back to, I don't really like using the term, but I'll go with a superfood, but they're the most nutriently dense and bioavailable foods that you can actually put in your body. And all of these chronic conditions didn't barely even exist 100 to 120 years ago. So it's what we now look at as normal that is so crippling to us. And just getting people to understand a pork chop, a steak, some chicken with maybe a little asparagus on the plate, that's what was normal forever. And maybe people can handle the veg aspect of it. And we changed our wheat crop here, and it's not as bad in Europe. And I think there's a lot of pesticides and insecticides and everything else. And that comes with all of that. But also with me going down a quantum health and circadian health biology, I filter what I eat through so many more lenses than I did even 6 years ago. So we won't have to go down all of that because that gets way too deep of a rabbit hole. But any new ideas that you're looking at or thinking about launching on the show, or is it just really getting that? I'm going to rephrase this question. I only got half of it out. I have noticed recently, now I know you've had Kendrick, I know you've had Fedke on a year ago, 9 months and a year ago, but the number of doctors, Dr. Tro, Dr. Ryan Cooley, a number of others from the medical profession that you've had on, is that just me picking up on that, or are you seeing more and more doctors showing up on your show?
I mean, often it's intentional. Like, often I'll just reach out to a doctor because I'll see them perhaps interviewed somewhere else, or I'll see them speaking somewhere else, and I feel like I really would love to have them on to talk. So yeah, I would like to have more doctors on. But also I try not to have too many doctors on, because I want it to stay as a channel where it's not too much theory. It's more like it's the people who are doing it day to day and experiencing the results that are coming on, because I think that's what's motivating. Because I think part of the problem, part of why we're at where we're at, is growing up, we've listened to too many professionals, whether it's a dietitian, a doctor, or whatever, and they've been the mainstream type that have given us too much bad advice. And so what we end up doing is we get to the point where we go, yeah, well, that's what they always say, eat less, move more, or whatever they tell you. That's what they always say. I've tried this before, it doesn't work. And so I don't want my channel to be the kind of channel where people watch it and go, oh, that's interesting what that doctor's saying, but that won't work for me. You know, so I want it to be the real story about someone who was, you know, the that won't work for me person, and completely transformed their life just by cutting out the carbs, or just by eating the steak, you know.
No, I definitely see all of that. Part of coming out of that corporate wellness, disease management, and risk management worlds, I'm used to working with lots of these kinds of people. And as you've heard me say, in 2018, I broke my brain, and I've broken the brain of a couple of doctors along the way. And that's still really part of my mission going forward. So I had to kind of revamp and make a whole new homepage on my website, because I realized I'm way too technical. I started asking advice of some people who I showed the site to, and they go, I don't even understand what you're doing there because it's so technical. And I'm like, well, actually, I'm trying to sell my own coaching services. And I had to kind of bring that back home up front. But just like when we did the third episode, where it's how do you break your doctor's brain? Because that's one of the things that, you know, once the person's seen 10, 20, 30, and people just start binge watching you. It's amazing to hear the people who come on, and the people who I talk to, who they're like, oh, I can't go a day without watching one or two of Dave's episodes. But then they now want to put this in play, and I'm not going to recommend to somebody who has medical diagnosed issues and on medications, because I realize once they return to their normal physiologic state, and I've got a blog on my website about this, you can become rapidly overprescribed by not changing your medications and changing your food. So I think sometimes, because I try to get so technical, because I want the doctors and I want it to be a guide for my coaching people here, but I can step them through it. But I don't want somebody to come to my page and just say, I'm going to jump into this. And I was just talking with a lady this morning from the Perth area, and she was looking to go all the way from kind of vegan, vegetarian, right to carnivore, lion diet right away. And I'm like, I don't know that I would recommend you do that, right? But she had started 10 days before we had a chance to talk and all of this. And so it's for me, as also being a coach, it's a balancing act. I want to provide the information so that somebody, if they want to try to do this all on their own and they're not in danger of being overprescribed right away, they aren't currently on meds, here's the breadcrumbs to do this all on your own, no pun intended. Here's the steak crumbs, the bacon bits to do this all on your own. But yeah, so that's some of what I battle with all of this, is trying where's the happy medium. And so we have our own different little journeys because of those nuances and different context of what we're doing.
But yeah, and definitely that's something that everyone considering this diet needs to think about. And that's that, if you're on blood pressure meds, for example, like you really need to monitor what's going to happen with your blood pressure, because potentially a couple of weeks of doing carnivore, your blood pressure is going to plummet. And if you're taking blood pressure meds on top of that, you could be in a really bad situation. So like you have to be very,
Same
very
thing with
careful.
high glucose. If you're pre-diabetic or diabetic and you're on metformin or already starting insulin, and all of a sudden things normalize, because in 2 months you can be at normal glucose, even quicker, depending upon how much metabolic dysfunction was there at the moment. So yeah, we don't want people passing out driving, walking down steps, standing up, falling down, hitting their heads. All of these things are realistic situations because the body intrinsically heals. Let me play one more thing off of you. I don't think we've talked about these before. And I'll be curious if you've heard this elsewhere. This is more of just this last year of an epiphany of mine on my 6-year journey. And coming out of the health insurance side of everything, where, doctors in their electronic medical records, they're doing diagnosis and CPT codes that insurance will then reimburse on. And one of the things that just hit me, I'm like, oh my God, almost 80% of new diagnoses start off with idiopathic hypertension, idiopathic diabetes, idiopathic depression, idiopathic everything. And to me, I'm just like, well, this just is the way to make sure that the brainwashing and gaslighting that happens in medical school, that all of these things are chronic progressive conditions that there's no cure for, because idiopathic is, I believe, Latin for of unknown origin. And I would venture to say you and I both know what the origin of all of these things are. But once you let the doctor get to that point of saying, oh, this is because they never diagnose insulin resistance. Because once somebody hears you have insulin resistance, they can go home and type it into Google or YouTube or whatever, watch and learn from people like ourselves about what insulin resistance unchecked becomes. And it's all of the things they go to the doctor and get drugs for. And have you heard anybody made that idiopathic connection before?
So, I haven't heard of like people making the connection, except just by accident. But here's my thoughts on this thing, right? So idiopathic, this is of unknown origin. This would not be tolerated in any other industry. This is only tolerated because it's a moneymaker in medicine, right? It would not be tolerated in any other industry. You think of Google, right? If you've got software engineers and there's this big problem with their servers, or there's a big problem with one of their applications, right? And it's being debugged, and the team that's debugging it and trying to find out what the problem is comes back to the project manager and says, it's an idiopathic problem. We don't know what's causing it. The project manager will say, well, get back in there until you can work it out. And you're not going home tonight until it's fixed, because this is impacting our application worldwide or whatever. There's just no way it would be tolerated anywhere else. The streetlights aren't working, and the electricity company's like, well, it's an idiopathic problem. And it's like, well, I don't care. Fix it.
It's mind numbing. It's only when it's life and death that we allow idiopathic of unknown origin to be played. I think you just made an excellent point, and I'll just play one more off there, and then I can let you go, because I appreciate all the time you've given me today. But I think that's one of the reasons why some of the major breakthroughs that we're actually having inside of this whole metabolic health and healthcare space, it's coming from engineers who in the rest of their life and world, just as you just described, the Dave Feldmans, the Ivor Cummins, Dr. Gerald Pollack, who's a bioengineer out of the University of Washington and does so much incredible work with structured water. And this kind of gets all into the quantum biology aspect. But there are people who haven't been conditioned in college and med school to just accept this, because there, like you just said, there's nowhere else that this would be allowed, because no business owner is going to let you just waste millions of dollars of profit, or a service provider who isn't going to keep providing service, like you said, the street lights. We're going to figure out what the problem is. It's only when it comes to healthcare that we don't figure out where these problems come from.
I think that's a really good point, and I hadn't really made that connection, but that is a really good point. And I mean, that's part of the reason I'm so interested in this stuff, because I have an IT background as well. And it's like the satisfaction you get from realizing all the connections going back through history and stuff, and realizing like a lot of this plant-based dogma started with, the Seventh-day Adventist Church and all this kind of thing, and going back and really understanding how all these things are connected. It's kind of like debugging. It's kind of like skipping through some code and realizing, oh, okay, it's gone into that loop, and that's why the problem's happening now, or that's why it's persisting, or something like that.
Absolutely. So yeah, so some of these people are, that never had a medical degree are on my website. I've got a page called My Healthcare Heroes. And who taught me, who opened my mind, and Dr. Sarah Hallberg right there, and many of them on the bookshelf, all behind me, and it was crazy as I was on the stage across from the Washington Monument doing the Metabolic Revolution rally in Washington, D.C. just Sunday, and there was a poster of Dr. Sarah Hallberg up on the stage with me. And all of these heroes who were part of my major epiphany and learning in the 12,000 hours the last 6 years since, that here I am now being an activist, trying to get the word out, trying to get the government to understand the guidelines we created haven't worked. There's epidemics of type 2 diabetes, heart disease, every single thing, mental health going on everywhere. And it's because we don't follow established science. We are allowing crap like idiopathic to flow into, or to dominate how we are treating healthcare. Anyhow, Dave, any last comments or thoughts that you would like to throw in before we wrap?
I would just say, for anyone watching who has a problem with sugar, a problem with alcohol, or any kind of addiction to anything, could be addictions to gaming or anything, getting carbohydrate out of your diet is going to be a way of helping you cope with that in a better, more healthy way. And whatever your addiction happens to be. So it's worth giving it a try. And it's not something you need to jump into. You can go into it very slowly, but it's well worth it. And you know, you open your eyes to the potential you've got when you get rid of a lot of these dependencies.
Absolutely. And I just want to, not wearing a hat, but tip a hat, take a hat off to you with what you're doing, because I'm sure you get this idea that you're changing the world. While you have 800 stories that you've had people tell, that's impacted tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of people, because a number of people who saw me on your channel have reached out to me, but they've not yet been on your channel. They're still at the beginning, or they're trying to figure out how are they going to get from here to there. And the inspiration and the hope that you're providing is just absolutely incredible to the world. So first of all, thank you so much for everything you do. Thank you for coming on and sharing your story with the audience here, small but hopefully budding and growing. And I look forward to seeing you again in the near future.
Cheers, Brett. Thank you so much for having me on. Really appreciate it.
So great. Thank you so much.